Hi, this is Ms. Lancaster. I wanted to touch base with you all a little bit about intersectionality and privilege. We're in chapter 7 now, and we're moving into chapter 8, and then again, chapter 9. So we're in the inequality chapters. Some of these concepts are brought up in chapter 7. Some of them are brought up in chapter 8, but they do then also relate to chapter 9. So I wanted to just kind of at this point bring up what privilege is and how it relates to intersectionality and how it relates to inequality in general. So there is this concept that is brought up in chapter 7 as you're reading. Hopefully you all have started reading it and you're moving right on through the material. But this concept of intersectionality, your book, I have the book right here. Let me read the definition from the textbook. It is a concept that identifies how different categories of inequality, race, class, gender, etc., intersect to shape the lives of individuals and groups. So what exactly does that mean? If you think back to chapter 5, we learned about statuses, right? And statuses are positions that we hold. Now we're in chapter 7 and we're learning about what stratification is. And stratification is basically the hierarchy of the statuses that we hold. So our statuses place us in our positions in our social world. And in our social world, is full of lots of different groups that we're part of, lots of different categories that we're part of, that therefore give us different statuses. Okay, so when we're talking about intersectionality, we can have a variety of statuses that place us in variety of levels in stratification. I like to kind of think about stratification as these various ladders that exist within our lives. So we can be high on the ladder in one position, in one status that we have, whether it's an ascribed status or an achieved status, or we can be low on a ladder based on whatever system, or somewhere in between. Okay, so most of us are going to fall all over the ladder in various statuses that we have. And that's kind of what the concept of intersectionality is about. How we have these various categories, these various statuses, these various responsibilities, and some of them will give us some high status, some potential privilege, and some of them will not. Okay, so that's where this concept of privilege comes in. Our textbook doesn't really define privilege until we get into chapter 8, where they start to talk about white privilege. But I like to kind of bring up privilege earlier because, in our society, we tend to focus on privilege in relationship to race, but race is only one form of privilege. As I mentioned in one of the videos, it may be the chapter 8 video, so you may not have seen this yet. But I do mention how privilege is an unearned advantage. It is discussed in chapter 8 that that's exactly what it is. Our textbook defines it as an unearned advantage according to members of the dominant group. Okay, so when we're looking at stratification, regardless of what stratification we're talking about, we have to recognize that there's always going to be a dominant minority relationship. It's easier for us to sometimes see that when we get into the race chapter because of the actual minority group statuses and the dominant group statuses based on race. But that is not the case that it's just race, right? When we talk about dominant minority group relationships, anytime in a sociology class, it has to do with power and influence, okay? So when we think about it in chapter 7, if I'm part of an upper class status, I have more privilege than those that are of a lower class status, okay? So thinking about our social class, we are born into our social class, and even though our system is an achieved stratification system, we are still ascribed to it, right? We don't get to pick our parents. So with the statuses that our parents have, it's going to give us the opportunities based on what their life chances. Our life chances are going to be based on their position, okay? So we may be born into privilege or we may lack privilege. So this is why I want us to kind of recognize that both privilege and intersectionality work hand in hand, because our higher level statuses are going to give us potentially more privilege, right? Whether we work for it or not, right? And our lower statuses, the statuses that are lower in position, right? Lower in the status is going to potentially reduce our privilege, right? So I want us to all recognize that we do not have any control over our privilege or lack of privilege, right? This is something that is, again, unearned. So when it comes into the chapter 8 chapter and it's talking about white privilege, a lot of people get defensive about that concept because it has to do with race, okay? But you need to kind of recognize that if you are white, you may have experienced some unearned advantage advantages in comparison to individuals who are not white in our society, just because of the way our structure is, okay? Just like if you were born into a lower class or you were born into an upper class, you may have privilege or lack of privilege. We really in our society don't have a hard time recognizing the fact that there are underprivileged individuals that exist. We use that concept all of the time in relationship to income and wealth. However, if there's underprivileged, there has to be at least privileged, and realistically, if there's underprivileged and there's privilege, there is likely also overprivilege. And this can then, if we look at the inequalities in relationship to income and wealth, we can probably start to recognize some of those. So I just wanted to kind of touch base, let you all know about these concepts. Please let me know if you have questions. There are some if you're in a seated class, I actually would do what I call a privilege walk, but we walk for different people, just because I don't ever want anybody to be stigmatized. However, in an online class, it's a little bit harder to find an actual privilege activity. So there are some decent privilege activities, privilege tests that I've found on the internet. It's BuzzFeed, not my favorite source. However, I've gone through a few of them that are out there, and I'm going to be sharing links of 2 of them in the announcement that is going to be posted along with this this video. So please take some time, take these quizzes, kind of see where you stand. You may feel that you're not privileged, but find that you do have some privilege, or you may feel that you're very privileged, but then find that maybe you're not as privileged as you thought you were. Okay, so just kind of take it with a grain of salt, of course, because it is an online source, but a lot of these questions from a sociological standpoint are really great gauges of giving us some ideas of how one may be privileged or lack privilege. Okay. Again, any questions, please don't hesitate to post that question in the discussion board, post it in the reflection journal, or email me directly. Okay. And have a great day.